we seal the barrel, and we attach food-grade antifreeze to the front of the barrel. Now, when insects come out of dormancy, they see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. They go into the antifreeze and are preserved. The Forest Service then comes and screens those. And as a result of this work, we discovered a new species of Acrilis new entirely to science. So this was proof concept that these type of collaborations would further safeguard our collection because we knew what was out there. Then we made efforts to collaborate with other institutions in the city, such as the Parks Department and the Department of Environmental Conservation, on outreach related to oak wilt to get the community more involved in seeing trees and reporting them to the Parks Department and the DEC. But then we stepped back and we said, how can we preserve anything without archiving our data? How could we know what was there and what needed to be preserved if we didn't have a good sense of the age of our size class of our tree collection? So we developed this repository here using ArcGIS available tools and created a unique script that links two ArcGIS softwares. One is called Collector, which we use in the field to collect information, and one is called Workforce, which we use to manage our workforce. We created a unique script that links those two, so when we're in the field we see a tree, Collector, then we enter the information in Collector, which then sends it to Workforce for a work order. This also allows us to draw polygons around areas to create cyclical work that needs to be performed in the field. And before I continue, we've made this software available to anyone who wants to use it. So it's out there. And it uses software that you need to pay a nominal license for. When we load this repository, immediately we see a snapshot of our diversity, which we're continually trying to improve in order to further insulate our collection. And we want to know what's out there. And it provides a real up-to-date assessment of where we are with our living collection. And then was sort of the fun part. We were able to communicate this information to our visitors by taking that data and turning this information into a visitor app, which allows visitors to geolocate themselves using a browser on their smartphones and identify any tree on site. As soon as a tree is planted at Greenwood, it appears in this site so that visitors can immediately see it and learn more about what we have there. Beyond digital interpretation, we're also focusing on physical interpretation. So in this slide, we have an interpretive obelisk there as part of a program that we've called Alive at Greenwood, which features 12 interpretive obelisks throughout the landscape, talking about ideas like climate change, the benefits of green spaces, and species adaptation. So in this slide, what we're showing here is not only the obelisk, but also 6 wispy live oaks that we got from the National Arboretum from the seed collections that were from the northernmost part of Virginia. We've been trialing plant material to experiment with hardiness in our zone because we realize that the living collection is dynamic and we can't just focus on veteran trees. We need to begin to figure out what plants might be better adapted to our growing environment. These live oaks have made it through 3 winters and are about 2 inches in diameter. So this is an older photo. In addition to our younger trees, we also want to focus on our veteran tree preservation. That's really what I'm here to talk about today. These trees define the institution and really help us broadcast to the community the importance of preserving sites like Greenwood, historic landscapes that have trees of significant size. So this is our state champion sassafras, the background there. And this is not a slide of that large black oak in the foreground. It's actually the Franklinia there in the background, peeking out there, the lighter green large shrub. And we wanted to include this because it's not contingent on species. It's about size in this information. So this really does lead naturally into what we consider to be a veteran, our definition of veteran trees. So I'll read this. The identification of veteran trees may be subject to the valued interests applied to their aesthetic, cultural value, and biological function because of their age, size, or condition relative to other trees of the same species in the area. What this really amounts to is you know one when you see one, which is entirely subjective. there are, that slide is a little warped, but there are groups like the Ancient Tree Forum and the Veteran Tree Initiative in the UK that specialize in metrics in order to understand how to interpret veteran tree characteristics. While this is helpful, and we'll see examples in the case studies that I talk about today of trees that have sap run, loose bark, and hollows, we consider veteran to mean something that's culturally significant in our landscape. This is your standard pruning flowchart that ANSI provides for general pruning, as you guys know. And while this is fairly straightforward for your normal tree, we felt like we needed to revise it slightly for our veteran collection. We worked with Mark Bridge of Tree Imagineers and Phil Kelly of North American Training Solutions to come up with a new metric to define what we wanted to do on our grounds. And before I get there, I should define retrenchment. And the ISA Best Management Practices defines it as a crown reduction process involving one or more pruning events to manage loss of support or crown decline. Simply, we're deploying these practices here in order to maintain the tree. But before I go further, it's important, I think, to make a few caveats. Pruning techniques are just one part of this process. This work is largely investigatory. There is no peer-reviewed scientific information about the efforts that we're making here. We're trying things, we're seeing what works and what doesn't work, and we're evaluating. What makes Greenwood a unique site to do this is that we are able to follow up on the trees and most often address soil first, and follow up on these trees on a yearly basis. But I also want to say, and I think it's important to recognize that I realize these interventions aren't for everyone and they aren't for every application. Greenwood is a unique site. We have 300,000 visitors annually. Central Park has as many visitors in a weekend. So relatively speaking, we have fewer hazards. Most of the locations of these veteran trees are in older areas of the cemetery. While there are monuments nearby, there are very few people hazards. So we're able to sort of look at it that way. And I'm going to now sort of go into some of the case studies of trees that we've worked on the grounds using this approach. So, first one, 51-inch red oak in 2018 tested positive for bacterial leaf scorch, spider mites, and leaf spots. We began a soil treatment after 2018 with Cambistat to reduce stress while increasing resistance to foliar disease, and a fertilizing program to make sure there was adequate nutrients available to grow a full leaf canopy. We saw that after that first year, it was beginning to retrench naturally. It was showing greater internal growth and a positive response, so that we knew after addressing the soil, we could begin to look to pruning the tree. So we took about a two-pronged approach. We used our spider lift and our bucket truck, and we reduced all leaves by approximately 2 to 3 meters. The limb stems with hypoxylon were reduced to remove all visible evidence of fungi. And we continue to monitor the tree. So this is just one episode. The next episode is going to be us looking at it after a month out, photographing the tree per month to see the effects of the tree pruning, and constantly seeing if evaluating what we did helped or hurt. And this was on one line on here, but this gets into another practice that we tried to deploy here, which is the concept of fracture pruning. And the idea here is that you take a branch that you're about to prune and you strip it down instead of just cutting it flush. And I know people in the room are shaking their heads at this. And I have my email address at the end of the presentation, so you can all send me mail while you tell me this isn't standard of horticulture practices. We have the luxury of being able to try these things and see if they work. And I'm not saying they do, but I'm saying we have the ability to try. And if we're not constantly looking for new methods of preserving these old trees, I don't know what the point is, really. We know that it creates habitat because it creates a vector for biological properties, and it redirects sprouting to the interior of the limb. So beyond that, if anyone wants to walk out, that's the last slide about fracture pruning that we have in the presentation, so we're going to be going on to. So, this is a 58-inch silver maple. Had decay in the main trunk and scaffolding limbs, but was slowly beginning to retrench, showing more sprouting in the interior of the tree. We removed the dead wood as necessary. The picture on the right shows our decision to reduce the height of regrowth rather than remove the leader. We didn't want to do too much about this tree beyond reduce the risk. It was naturally retrenching, and we just tried to mitigate any chance for catastrophic failure in the canopy. So, for that picture that I showed, provided by the Ancient Tree Forum, this would not be considered a veteran tree. We consider it a veteran tree because of what it's suffered in the landscape, which is a lightning strike, continued decay. It's a 48-inch pin oak. There's a split, a lot of decay, significant structural defects. The goal here was primarily to reduce the risk of catastrophic failure. So we braced that main split, we installed 2 cables, and then we pruned the tree to reduce torsional load to prevent a chance that limbs would be sheared off during a storm event. So, this is a drone video that we took on the beach that we're going to be talking about now. This is a 51-inch European beach, bleeding canker on its buttress roots, fairly severe dieback in its scaffolding limbs. There was some internal suckering. Our goal here with the interventions that we made were to stimulate more internal suckering to initiate retrenchment in the tree. Does that make up for the fracture print? That's a beautiful view. No? Okay. I've shut down the computer at this point.
There is a.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this was the first picture on the right is directly after pruning. The next one is the following spring. We reduced the tree to points where viable interior growth or latent or dormant buds were still active. We removed material with serious fungal issues. We noticed continued decline in the upper part of the tree, but more interior growth. And on this tree, we used zip lines to remove debris from the interior of the tree outward so that we wouldn't have to lower it directly into the canopy. Our goal here was just to get one more year for this tree. It was marked for removal, and it wasn't going to live much longer, but we knew that we wanted to get one more year. And I think if we consider that we're now in its 3rd year of continued leaf and flower production, that it's a success. We continue to see decline in the canopy, but we're beginning to frequently reduce the tree to reduce risk, but allow the tree to produce leaves and produce flower and then produce benefits. So I think that's a win. I think you can know probably at this point where I fall on this question. Do these trees still provide value? If there is no immediate risk of failure, are they truly a hazard? Do we have the opportunity to redevelop them to form a new central leader within these trees to allow them to continue to provide benefits and to slowly remove them? I guess the moral of how we approach tree care is that we first look to preserve rather than remove. And we've sought to reduce risk and evaluate how the trees are responding to the pruning dose. But our first impulse is not to remove the tree, but to preserve it. And we haven't sort of shut up about it for a while. We've tried to collaborate with other institutions like the Brooklyn Botanic Garden on a course called Veteran Tree Care, which we brought in arborists to talk about different biological and physiological functions of older trees, and then do a field day when we looked at different examples about interventions. And then we worked with the North American Training Solutions on training opportunities for urban arborists, new techniques, new rigging techniques to learn about in terms of working with older trees in the urban canopy. And that's Dr. Kevin Smith on the right there, so the heir to Alex Shigo, and Mark Bridge of Tree Imagineers and North American Tree, working on one of our oaks. So I have two more slides, and one of them is a stump. And I thought I'd close it out with a stump. This is our beach memorial here, which is a stump at about 8 feet high that remains from a tree that fell during a storm event. So we've kept it for two main reasons. We've maintained it because we feel like trees at any stage of their life, even in remnant form, provide value, even if not aesthetic value. And because we view this tree as an interpretation of a cultural memory. The European beech is no longer adapted to really growing in the conditions that we have at Greenwood in Brooklyn, but it's one that truly defines the landscape. So we've kept this beech as a reminder, a monolith, an obelisk, just as important as the obelisks around it, to define a tree that once served a great deal of importance in our landscape. My email address is cut off, so I win. But I'll say this to end. If we're only pruning trees for aesthetic reasons, I think we've already lost. I'm not saying that all these preservation methods are right for everyone, but I think if we start to look at tree preservation as a concept, not just for older trees, but for the larger sense of how we approach tree care in general, I think we're doing something right. So thanks for your time, and I can take some questions.
Are you guys hiring?
Not right now, but
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Charap, I was just wondering, regarding the Agrilla species that you found, that was on a Fagus sylvatica, and what was the rest of the name of it?
Spud.
Spud?
No, not yet named. Our friends from the U.S. Forest Service want to name it after the deceased member of the Beastie Boys. So that's in the running, but they haven't named it yet. Yeah.
Fracture cuts or coronet cuts. How many years since then, and do you have any observations about how that worked?
1 month. So, yeah,
no
we'll let you know.
observations yet.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've spent my time on the internet forums. I realize that it's not particularly well received in many groups. I understand that. We have the trees and we have the ability to try these things, so we're going to keep trying them. This work is investigatory, so thanks. Any other ones? Questions?
What's the role of root collar excavation and what's the role of root collar excavation work that you might be doing and other work with the airspade tool if you use that?
Yeah, it's essential. A lot of our trees are buried up to their eyeballs in soil because we're constantly moving soil. As a cemetery, the grade always changes. If the correct approach to this kind of veteran tree care was the first example that we showed where we first addressed the soil. The other examples were because we needed to intervene before or remove the tree. But addressing the soil, addressing the root zone first is the first step to preserving these trees.
Hey, can you talk a little bit more about the fertilizer? You said you were addressing the soil. So how do you strike a balance between overstimulating, or are you not using any nitrogen at all?
It's a lot less nitrogen than we would usually expect for a tree like this, but we need to make sure that there's enough nutrient in the soil profile to help the tree leaf out if it's really dying back in the canopy. And I can share with you the spec that we use on it, sure. Cambistat is sort of a miracle drug.
Scott has questions.
So this is a pretty intensive program. Is this funded out of a permanent endowment or current revenue? How do you fund this program?
So, because we view these trees as part of our identity, Greenwood itself funds the preservation of these trees. Funds bringing out Phil Kelly and Mark Bridge to work on them. We're making a real commitment to preservation as one of our foundational identities, from the monuments to the trees. So it's funded internally. Please.
So a lot of the stuff that you showed us with carbon sequestering and stuff like that is really strong in the environmental community. And of course, pesticides don't fare well in that community.
Right.
So who are your stakeholders and what kind of pressures do you get to balance those kind of things?
That's a great question. I think our stakeholders are lot owners. We're at the service of our lot owners. So lot owners first, the general public, then way down the list, maybe birders and other people who come to visit the cemetery. So we know that around just 300,000 are coming to the cemetery annually for events, for cemetery functions, for tree walks. But our first goal is to reduce risk for the lot owners. So when we feel like the tree is in a place in which it's not often frequented, there's less foot traffic, we feel that we have more opportunity to experiment with some of these techniques, whereas in a more frontal area of the cemetery, we'd be less likely to try these efforts. I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
have you considered, you're considering alternative techniques, which is great. Have you considered filling any of these cavities or voids? That was, I think, in practice a long time ago and has kind of gone out of favor.
Yeah, unfortunately no, because we're having to remove too many trees that were filled with concrete and bricks. We're trying to leave hollows alone for the most part, if they're showing good signs of reaction wood and disease and response. So no, not doing much filling, moving away from that as much as we can. I got time if you wanna.
Just an observation, or about how many grave sites are in this cemetery?
600,000. 7,000 trees or 600,000 monuments. That's just monuments.
Yeah, you mentioned a 275-year-old red oak. What was the diameter of that tree? You know off the top of your head?
65?
I had a follow-up question as well.
Sure.
So are you thinking about alternative types of burials instead of just traditional headstones and caskets?
Yes, because we'd all like to stop digging in the roots of these trees. Yeah, absolutely. Green burials is something we think we're incorporating these ideas. Green burial is just the concept of a shallower grave that's dug by hand, and that there's no traditional coffin used. These require less mechanical disruption to the tree roots, and we're definitely looking to them for the future. Yep.
Do you need to remove trees to make room for more graves as you run out of land?
We have, but we're not really doing that anymore. I think in our history we have done that, yeah. Mostly calorie repairs. Yeah.
Which more room is there?
Limited in-ground space, but it'll always be.
For your oak will, have you been able to like trench around non-infected trees and everything seems fine, or you just trench around trees that are infected?
It's really hard to trench in a cemetery. So what we've tried to do is we isolated the tree where we found it, which was a 50-inch red oak that had already had a lightning strike. It was already in decline. The oak will came back in PCR testing, but it didn't genetically come out in the lab. We were we were confident that it was oak wilt. So we removed the tree, but we haven't seen oak wilt since. We've just seen more and more bacterial leaf storage.
What's the most popular time of year to visit?
Now? Oh, sorry, so someone asked me when the most popular time to visit. I think now, because there are no mowers now, it's quieter.
Hi, so I have a question about the live oaks that you planted.
Sure.
So, have they been in the ground long enough for you to compare how they would normally grow in Northern Virginia and what the rate that they did grow in Brooklyn to compare that data?
So we haven't yet, but we're working with our partners at the National Arboretum to gather that data set. They tend to lose their leaves, but flush in spring. There's no Spanish moss on them, obviously, but we do get, they've grown each year in diameter in a pretty impressive way. So eventually we'll have to remove them and then select from the ones that we've got there. Our seed collection is from the University of Virginia Richmond campus, right by the cafeteria. That's where our seeds are from. And anyone wants to write me, I can give you my email address, or I'm here for a little bit after the conference if you have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we got a few minutes before we can let you out there for lunch, so bear with us. But I've got a little bit of a time killer here. I want to give out some prizes, okay? But you have to answer a question. So if you know the answer to this question, raise your hand, and